Hi, and welcome to Hack Your Career. My name is Keith Wilson. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Education for AttackIQ. In this live stream, we're trying to introduce you to all sorts of careers in cybersecurity by sharing the stories of people behind those careers. Today's guest is a coworker of mine and one of AttackIQ Academy's newest instructor. Please welcome Jackson Wells.
Hey, Keith, thanks for having me, man.
Hey, how's it going, Jackson?
Good.
Great to have you on Hack Your Career, especially since you're very new to becoming an academy instructor. So we'd like to give our students and the greater population a chance to get to know you a bit, and even more importantly, find out about your career, how you got to where you are today. The things that you've done in the past, and what you've learned kind of along the way. Now, I think a lot of our viewers may recognize you as an instructor for AttackIQ Academy. And by the way, check out Jackson's current course, Top Attack Techniques, if you haven't already. We're going to put a link to that in there. It's a fantastic course. I tell people it's a 45-minute upgrade to your brain OS. It's a real quick hit. You'll be thankful that you were introduced to this tool, this calculator that Jackson teaches after. But your actual role, so people may recognize you as an instructor, but your actual role with AttackIQ is not a full-time instructor. You're a customer solution engineer. So what are some of the day-to-day things you do in that role?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a CSE, or customer solutions engineer, my main task is to really hop on calls with customer after they purchase and make sure they're getting value out of the product. I want to help them operationalize it, get some strategy on testing, and help them really get the most effective tool out of it.
So getting value out of it, that could mean a lot of things. I want to try and get a bit more deep into what you specifically do. Are you helping them write any sort of custom code, Python, anything like that?
Yeah, sure. So we have a large library of tests, but as you know, every vertical is different. Threat actors target you differently. So what I help them do is maybe write scenarios differently or tailor testing styles to their vertical, so we can make sure that they're getting a verbose testing structure.
Okay. And I would think there's a lot of different elements that go into what you do, right? Because there's so many different situations that a customer could be in. And this isn't just AttackIQ specifically. This is for any vendor that works with hundreds of different customers, right? Everybody's environment is going to be different. So what I'd like to know is what from your background has helped you with this? What sort of technical pieces, training, learning, experience have you had from your background that has helped you with this current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to being at AttackIQ, I worked for a really well-known MDR company called Critical Start. And for a while working there, I was a senior security analyst. And I had the benefit of working with multiple different organizations with different verticals, seeing different security controls being attacked in many different ways. So that gave me a lot of visibility to different ways threat actors actually attack different companies and why. And then moving from that, I worked as a detection engineer. So I would help bridge the gaps on security products to help make sure that you have more visibility to attacks. So with all that combined, that really helped me pivot into this.
So having it was still for a vendor, but you were doing essentially blue teaming for multiple companies for that vendor. So you got to work as an analyst in multiple environments, right? Again, expanding things, but you have this point of view from the customer point of view, essentially, right?
Exactly.
You understand what it's like to be a customer in the day in, day out things. Now you're able to be AttackIQ specific with those things for those customers. Does that sound accurate?
Exactly. I mean, just seeing that every vertical is different and doesn't take the same defense plans. So we need to test differently for each.
Yeah. Now, what was something that you didn't know going into this role that you had to quickly figure out? Were there any skills where you're like, oh crap, like because in my experience, and I'm sure you've had the same experience, you apply for the job that may be a little out of reach, right?
Sure.
Like you're going to stretch and most of it, but there's definitely going to be, in really any job, there's going to be things that you don't know. So what were one of those things for you?
Right. So it's definitely a hard skill, and it's a coding in Python. I've always known enough to be dangerous, and I can read it and understand it. But working this role when I'm helping them build scenarios and such, you really got to know your Python pretty well.
Well, yeah, because it's not just for you anymore. You have to show it to somebody.
Yeah, I'm not just making a calculator on my own project anymore. I'm actually trying to help their defense.
Yeah. So Python was, or like, so you had the basics of Python. You had to kind of more formalize that knowledge, right?
Yeah,
What were some of the steps that you took to learn that skill, to figure that out?
yeah. So I read a lot of code. I was consistent with it. So you just need to continuously every day stay at it and look at code, and it starts getting more and more familiar with it. Um, reading up on how to code is one thing, but actually practicing it is another. So staying consistent with looking at the code and modifying it, seeing if I change this, what does it do, and start building that repetition. It starts sticking.
Yeah. So, and I think that's kind of an ongoing debate too, is do you need to know how to code to be in cybersecurity?
Not necessarily. I would say no. There's a lot of aspects of cybersecurity that you can really drill on without needing to really know code. It just helps, especially with automation.
Right. Well, and I mean, there are certain roles, obviously, where you do have to know code.
Oh, absolutely. If you're a developer, a security developer, you better know your code in and out.
Yeah, but it's not something that you have to know for every role. So I want to reiterate that we're talking about something that Jackson needed for this particular role that he had to quickly hop in on. It's not, Python is incredibly helpful. I'm at the level you described as knows enough to be dangerous, right? And that's more of a danger to myself than others. You're just writing, crappy kind of tossed together code, but it does help in automation for sure. Is there anything in particular that you enjoy about the role that you do it with AttackIQ?
Yeah, I mean, first off, working with my peers, great people here, but also working with the customers, getting to talk with them, getting to know the customers and how they want to secure. I think it's awesome insight on knowing how a bank might want to secure versus a library.
Yeah.
It's very different, and getting to know them, it's awesome.
So just being able to see all of the different environments, the different security challenges, that different vertical, and it's not even, you could have different challenges within the same vertical. I'm sure you've seen that too,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, there's just so much that goes into a security program that I think a lot of people take for granted, and they kind of think, oh, well, what works for one will work for another, and that's not true at all.
Not necessarily.
Now, you did mention this a bit, and before working for AttackIQ, you worked for Critical Start as a security analyst and lead detection engineer. So let's start with security analyst. And what did you do in that role?
Yeah, so when I first started, I had 12-hour day shifts followed by 12-hour night shifts. So it was a lot of eyes on glass, is what we called it. And we essentially had a centralized monitoring platform where all of our companies would send their alerts into, and we would scan the alerts coming in called the queue and look for any odd behavior. And if we did see any odd behavior, we would escalate it to the customer based on the severity and take action if needed, whether it's isolating a device, blacklisting, whitelisting software, etc.
And all those different actions, those were generally dictated in the agreement with the customer, right? The customer tells you up front, if this happens, you have the ability to do these things. So that can be all of these different things. So you worked as a security analyst, then moved to the lead detection engineer role. What did you do in that role?
Yeah, so that was a bit of a pivot. When I was being an analyst, I noticed that things sometimes weren't being detected. New attacks were coming out, and security controls were taking a while for them to either make detections or customers wanted them quicker. So I stepped into the detection engineering role so I can help bridge the gap. And really, day to day, I would do some security research of seeing new attacks out there and get to know my security products a little bit better and see what their capabilities are for making custom detections. And when I knew those capabilities and knew the security vulnerabilities out there and what attackers were doing, I would start crafting specific queries and build a library for our MDR to use and offer to customers.
Yeah. So that you could go, okay, well, we know these attackers work in this way, and here's how you detect this. Here's the analytic that I've written for this. And I think, I haven't heard or spoke, at least I haven't spoken to too many detectioneers. So it's a title that I'm not entirely familiar with. It's still fairly new to me. And I think it may be fairly new to some other folks out there too. So it's interesting hearing you describe that, right? It's not something we necessarily think of as a full-time role, because it wouldn't necessarily be a role, I don't think, maybe in a corporate security team. Possibly they may have a full-time role like that. But for a SOC who's monitoring hundreds to thousands of different enterprises, it makes sense to have somebody who's constantly writing new analytics. What was one of the most important things you learned in the role? Let's start with the security analyst role, because I want to start what you learned there and translate that into seeing if you built upon that at all in the detection. So security analyst, what was the most important things you learned in that role?
And this is going to sound pretty basic, but this is true. One of the most important things I learned is you will never know everything, and Google is your best friend. I know it sounds simple, but that is the truest thing I could ever say. Humble yourself and know when you look at something, it might be new to you, and Google it and learn. You will be consistently learning. And if you just try to know what you've previously learned, you will fall behind.
Yeah, and I think people, at least I did when I first got started, make the mistake of thinking they have to know everything, right? They have to walk around with all that knowledge in their head. And I think the difference between like an amateur and a professional is an amateur will Google something. A professional will Google something and know specifically what he's Googling instead of just tossing words out there.
I like to say it's not what you know, it's learning how to learn is the best way forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say on many occasions, though, they're probably the only difference between me and an entry-level person and the knowledge we have is I know how to Google the answer more efficiently than they do.
There you go.
That's really it. But yeah, like you said, it's a constant learning thing. That's one of the things that I love about just IT and security in general. It was one of the things that got me interested in security and IT is something that's always evolving, right? Something new to learn. And from working with you, I've noticed that too. You seem to be very much so into learning, right? And continue learning very much so that like pretty soon after you started with AttackIQ, you're like, so how can I be an instructor? Like, how do I teach a class? How do we get this done?
Right.
So, I appreciate that. And I think it's a cool thing. Have you ever taken time outside of AttackIQ Academy? Have you ever mentored anybody or trained anybody or done anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was taught in the philosophy the best way to learn is to teach. That's actually a little bit why I really wanted to be an instructor, because I think when you learn the material, teaching it really helps it stick, and it also helps other people. So again, at my previous position, I started a little kind of like a hacking group where we would just all get together and go over techniques and actually demonstrate how they work. And I got the benefit of working with awesome people and learning from them, as well as teaching on tactics I've used to get into machines or how it works. And once we're all aware, we can defend better.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you said it great too. You help yourself by solidifying knowledge, and you help other people by teaching them, but you also help yourself more so than just solidifying knowledge. When you help other people, you get a reputation as being helpful. Mm-hmm. Helpful people tend to get jobs a lot easier than unhelpful people. They have a lot more connections because they're known as being the person that wants to teach and be helpful. So it really does have lasting benefits. And that's something I want to encourage our viewers to do is if you have, and you don't have to be a super seasoned security person, you can know one specific thing. Maybe it's something maybe it's the OSI model and you want to solidify your learning on that, teach it to somebody else, right? It'll pay off in so many different ways. Okay. I want to go back to your career now. Mm-hmm. Let's again talking about time as analyst, because I think during this time you were still fairly new to cybersecurity, not necessarily IT, but cybersecurity. I'd be willing to bet you made a fair amount of mistakes.
Oh yeah, painful.
Would you be willing to share any of those with us?
Oh, regretfully so, sure. So whenever you're an analyst, there's times where, and mind you, it's not the biggest mistake, but whenever you're a security analyst, you might see something that is malicious or may look malicious. And whenever you see something like an active compromise, we're supposed to first off escalate to the customer. But not only that, we're supposed to contain that compromise. So when I was relatively green and learning how to be a security analyst, I saw something that I thought was malicious. It was some encoded PowerShell doing what I thought was something malicious. And I escalated and took action to actually isolate the device from the network. It turned out I woke up to some pretty, I don't want to say angry calls, but assertive calls from the customer saying, hey, this is our X, Y, and Z software behaving how it's supposed to. Please let our device back online. So, it's all learning experience and getting to know, like I said, the customer's environment, because
Yeah.
some are proprietary.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that does come back to the discussion of everybody's, environment's going to be different, because you're going to have software in there where you're like, well, had I known the piece of information that this was the company that authored this software, it'd be fine. But if anybody else were doing this, the network's under, the network is under siege. Let's do something.
And I'd rather be safe than sorry, right? So
yeah.
Thankfully, it wasn't a server isolated, which would be much more detrimental. It was just a Windows 10, I think, endpoint. So
sure. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, no loss, but still lesson learned, right? Lesson learned. Now, what type of person do you think, and so in your opinion, what type of person do you think makes a good security analyst?
Yeah, someone that really pays attention to detail and someone that loves to learn. You really need to love this to pursue it and grow in it. So those are my two, I'd say.
Okay, and same question for detection engineer. What type of person makes a good detection engineer?
The same traits really do apply. Attention to detail for sure, because you can create a detection that you didn't put enough detail into it and it just blows up and it's very false positive prone. And you need to stay with threats and learn because threats are evolving and it's never the same actions every time. So those two really still apply.
So, I mean, these both sound like great jobs. They sound fun. They sound interesting. But I want to give our viewers all viewpoints of these roles.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything you despise doing for either of these roles? I feel like everybody has a work task where they're just like, God, even if it's a once a month thing, they're just like, I don't want to do this.
Sure. I'll start with the security analyst role. And I'm going to say this because I'm answering your question, but I want to let the viewers know if they're aspiring to be a security analyst or trying to get in the field, it is a great role to have. You learn a lot and it's worth it. But I will say one thing I wasn't the biggest fan of is the work gets a little mundane at times, which can get dangerous. Looking at threats come in continuously and starting to notice trends and taking, if this happens, then I do this. When you take a black and white approach, it starts to get dangerous. You need to analyze everything as if it's the first time you saw it. So that gets mundane. It gets kind of taxing on you. That was probably my most pet peeve of the role of a security analyst.
Yeah, and we had a question come in. It's a good question. I don't know if you did any hiring or interviewing while you were in the role, but somebody had a good question, and I want to talk about it a little bit. And it's what type of questions do you ask in interviews for testing attention to detail?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I usually do a more so of a situational based question, not a multiple choice or a yes or no question. But what I like to do is have them explain a process to me. And I want to know how verbose they get into that process. Like, how does a computer talk to another computer? Well, they might answer, they send out a request and it goes over the network and gets to the endpoint. Or they might go down to the OSI layer and really start explaining it in detail. Or I'll ask them for an attack, like, how does ransomware work? And one person might say it encrypts all your files and you have to pay money. Or some people might go into the step-by-step that threat actors are doing. That really gives me an insight of how they look at situations and break it down.
Yeah, something that I used to do many roles back when I was working in support. So I was doing vendor support for internet security systems. We would give scenario questions in interviews. We'd draw, on a diagram. And I think it's probably a pretty infamous question. It's a pretty easy question. You've got computers, 4 computers all running to a closet with a switch and a router. You can't access the closet and there's a printer off to the side and, computer 1 can't print. Troubleshoot this for me. Mm-hmm. And like I knew what the problem was in my head. So they'd ask me for information. I'd give it back to them and I'd see that would give me their level of detail in their troubleshooting, right? It would give me their process of troubleshooting. And for me, I wasn't looking to see if you had right or wrong answers necessarily in that. I was looking to see what you did with information when I gave it to you. And if you continued with that. So if you got something wrong, I may give you a little hint that'll help you out, but you better remember it because it's going to come back up again later. And I'm going to see if you've retained it.
Yep.
Now, what I would give people an automatic no on is if they just gave up on the scenario question.
Absolutely.
Right? Because I was hiring for support. I can't have somebody on the phone with somebody going, you know what, this is too hard, I give up. So that, for me, like that alone would test so many different things.
And I would like to speak on that. Also, when you don't know the answer, it's okay. Like we said earlier, sometimes you don't know, but putting some thought and showing your mind process on it is great. And also saying, as far as the interview goes, saying, hey, I'll get back to you on that. And looking it up and figuring it out and then following up with an email, it speaks volumes. It shows that you want to learn it.
Yeah. Another question came in. I don't have any really, this is around consulting. I don't have much consulting experience. Jackson, I don't know if you've done, I've done a little bit, but nothing really security consulting. And it was data protection. Would it be a wise choice for someone who's trying to build a family to do consulting, since you can get calls on Saturday night to show up in the office Sunday morning? Yeah, I don't have a ton of experience with consulting and definitely not a legal expert, but I would say, you have to build into your contracts that if you are the only consultant, right, and you're contracted, you have to build in the times of when you're allowed to do these things, when call-ins are allowed, right? Especially if you're trying to start a family, you have to have some sort of structure around this, this consultancy. If you have experience doing consulting before, in the past, and you have cybersecurity experience, then maybe it's an option. But if consulting's new to you, and security is brand new to you, I don't know if now's the right time to do it. Again, that's my personal opinion. I don't have enough experience on that to really comment with a lot of, education, but hopefully that answers the question a little bit. Jackson, I don't know if you've got anything on that.
Just one little thing. And, if you want to spend the time and resources on it, you can absolutely do it. But if you're talking cybersecurity, a trend that threat actors do is they like to attack on holidays or weekends or whenever the office is scarce and when you want to be with your family, because they know that. So that's something to keep in mind. You'll probably be busy on the times you don't want to be busy.
Yeah. Sorry, I wish we could be more helpful on that. Hopefully we'll get somebody on that's a consultant, or we've got a great community of people watching the show right now. So if you've got advice for those that are commenting on here, please share that advice with them too. Now, your experience, Jackson, I want to kind of come back as we kind of look more at your career. Now, your experience prior to Critical Start was in information technology for the U.S. Navy. So first of all, thank you for your service. And I'm curious if you had any security responsibilities in this role that guided you toward cybersecurity.
Yeah, and hopefully this is inspirational, but when I was in the Navy, my actual position was more so like system administration and basic setup of networks. It wasn't really security focused. I mean, sure, we did things in a secure manner, being that we're United States military, but I wasn't by any means a security professional in the military. That's whenever I stepped into Critical Starts when I really harnessed my security. But yeah, while I was in the Navy, I really worked on typical networks, and I started studying on the side for security related things that helped me pivot.
Yeah. So what was it that made you decide then to move from making the packets go to making the packets safe? What was it that you were like, oh, this seems cooler to me? Was there anything like that, or?
Yeah, I like most people I get into cybersecurity, I thought hacking was fascinating. I said, how do programs get taken over, and how are they so evasive, and stuff like that. And I would set up networks, and they'd always say, make sure it's secure. And I would say, well, the cable is connected in the computer. Like, how is it? How is something bad going to happen? And that just intrigued me. So I started looking into it and found out how interesting it was, and decided to pivot the career.
So it started with IT in the Navy. During that time, you were, well, this is safe. This is a closed connection, right? When you got somebody telling you, no, you can get around that, no problem.
Yeah.
That spiked an interest in you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds pretty interesting to me. That would have got me hooked.
Yeah, just knowing how things can be broken and how you can fix it. I think just naturally, I've always been someone that likes to fix things and break things down to see how it works, and that really is what cybersecurity is all about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, hacking in its essence doesn't have to be done on a computer, right? No. I can break down a refrigerator to figure out how it works and rewire it. That's still hacking.
We're hacking careers here.
Yeah. Now I want to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to come way up to the present. And that's because we mentioned at the beginning, you just finished creating your first course for AttackIQ Academy. So I want to give the viewers some insight into that in the case of security education as a career route, right? So what you did for us is not a career thing, but there are career roles. There are instructor roles, there are instructional design roles, there are educational roles out there that focus on security, and that is an educational thing. So I wanted to give our viewers some insight into at least the process that we do and how we create things to see if it's something they might be interested in. And I want to talk to you about that process since you just went through it. And you can be honest with me. So you can answer these honestly. It's not going to, in fact, it may help us, fix things in the course creation process. But I want to know from your point of view, what did the process, I want you to explain the course creation process in your way, because I can explain, I can walk through every detail. That'll bore everybody. I want to hear it in your words, what the course creation process was.
Yeah. So to me, the course creation, first off, it was fun. And I'm not just lying to you, Keith. It was a great time. First off, you have a topic you're going to be teaching on. So you want to learn about that topic first. Make sure you know the ins and outs of that topic. In my case, it was the top attack techniques tool by CTID. So I decided to go there and learn all about it. And then once I've known and I've done my research on it, you start the course creation steps, which is first off, creating a course outline. What's the skeleton of the course going to look like? So once you have that skeleton course and you kind of know what your sections are going to be, you start putting some meat to the bone and start creating some content around that skeleton. And once you have that content built, you can really start making a script and start practicing, and it starts coming together. And it's really exciting when you can see the end product of starting from, just a little course outline to a full-blown academy.
Yeah, it's, there is, believe it or not, there is a process around it. I think a lot of people just kind of see the finished video. What they don't realize in most cases, that finished video, that finished course started about 3 to 4 months prior, right? And there's a whole process that we go through in making sure that we put out good quality content with instructors like Jackson. So what did you enjoy most about the process? Was it the research? It couldn't have been the writing. Nobody likes the writing.
It wasn't the writing. Definitely not the writing. It was the research, because that goes in line with what I like to do anyway. I like to learn. I'm a nerd like that. And I said, what does this tool have to offer and how does it work? And just learning that and learning how it works, I naturally start saying, how can I apply this to my lifestyle so I can teach people how they can apply it to theirs?
Yeah. Now, when you're learning, what sort of things do you look for in an instructor? When you're watching an instructor, you're probably making judgments in your head of how they're presenting the material. Are there any specific things that they do? And did you try and emulate any of this?
I tried to be, I really wanted to be as less robotic as possible. The more relatable the instructor is to me by, maybe even slipping in a joke here and there or keeping it close to earth. I really like that. And I also like when they keep the course interactive. No one likes death by PowerPoint. So whenever the course offers little labs or steps you can take to stay into it, I really like that.
Any advice out there for anybody who maybe has something in their head that they want to teach?
Start learning on it and writing it down. And maybe start talking to your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or teach people close to you. Make a blog. Put it out there, and then people start biting and it starts growing organically for you.
Yeah. So got another question for you, Jackson. For Veteran Academy folks and those seeking to educate, do you think how you built training for your junior ITs helped prime you to create on the LMS? So when you did training in the past, did that strike a nerve with you or do something that helped you when you were creating this class for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, when I was training junior analysts back in the day, we did a K through PhD method that I still work on today. First off, K through PhD teaches someone like they're a kindergartner, really break it down super simple, and then go up to middle school level, high school, and you gradually start getting more and more complex and technical with it. Because if you start with that foundation, they're going to build from that. If you start from a highly technical level, they don't have that foundation to fall on. So that's something that I learned early on for teaching that really helped me with this LMS course.
Awesome. Jackson, thank you so much for your time today. All of you, thank you for joining us. I want to remind everybody we're doing AttackIQ Academy live in New York City, July 14th. Haley's going to go ahead and put the link in there for you. Check to see if you're not in New York City, we're coming to other cities, including Chicago. We've got Houston. We've got, I think, Chicago, Houston, New York. I feel like I'm missing somewhere else in the US, but I could be wrong. London and Dubai left. So if I've named any of those cities, check out the page if you're interested in going. If you want to sign up, again, Haley's going to put that in chat. Special guest at the AttackIQ Academy live in New York City is going to be former guest of this program. You will also know him from Cybersecurity. Neil Bridges will be joining me for that class in New York City. And as always, check out all of our free courses. We've got over 20 of them in our catalog now, along with tons of videos, learning paths, get badges, CPE credits, certificates, all of that good stuff. And you get to see Jackson's newest course for free on academy.attackiq.com. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks for our next episode of Hack Your Career.